get started. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us for this session. We are really excited for the second night of our series called The Art of Listening, Navigating Difficult Conversations. And tonight we are really pleased to have the Reverend Dr. Kyle Small with us. And I'm really excited for all of you to hear from him. But Kyle is the professor of church leadership at Western Seminary. He's an ordained pastor originally in the Evangelical Covenant Church and now in the Reformed Church in America. He and his wife, Lindsay, served as co-pastors for more than 12 years. They have 3 children, Micah, Madeline, and Maggie, who they call Lulu. Kyle enjoys life most fully at the intersections of father, pastor, and professor. His life as pastor and teacher finds resonance as he explores the church as a socio-theological community. Kyle's teaching and research focuses on the church in America, spiritual formation, leading Christian communities, and theological education. He has a passion to discover the world through theologically shaped social research. His focus within these disciplines and methodologies emerges from a primary desire for the church to live as a community of God's people in the world. And he does blog semi-regularly. And if you want to check out some of his writing, you can go to www.pilgrimshome.blogspot.com. And beyond that, Kyle is a great friend and he's a great listener. And I'm really excited for him to get to guide us in some of his wisdom around the act of listening. So thanks, Kyle.
Thank you so much, Becca. And Esther, thank you for the invitation, along with Becca, to do this work called The Art of Listening, an Act of Hospitality. 2 quick things about Zoom as we get started. First is, again, as Becca said, just please be sure to have your mute button on. There will be a few times where I'll ask people to speak and you can feel free to unmute yourself then. The second thing is there are a couple of spots in our conversation tonight where I will be using chat. So if you're not familiar with chat, either on your phone or on your computer, at the bottom of your screen, it should say chat. Just open that box. If I give any wordy definitions, which as Becca read my bio, you can tell I have a tendency to be wordy at times. But if I give any wordy definitions, I'll be sure to put those in the chat box so everyone can see them. I hope that's helpful. I won't put anything in the chat that I don't also make known verbally and audibly. So just so you know, keep yourself on mute and please look at the chat box. It's interesting, actually, today I'm in a little place down south of Holland called Sawyer, Michigan, and my dad and I have been putting in floor. It started off this morning. This is a new endeavor for us, something that we're trying for the first time. And the morning started off kind of rough, trying to figure out how to get this started, how to make an old cottage square. And my father, who has patience that surpasses mine, listened to me as I ranted about the difficulty of this job and quickly wanted to hire somebody else to do this work. He stuck with me with patience and suspending judgment. And ultimately we got to work, we figured it out. And in the end, we're about 60% done with the floor today. An act of hospitality is an act of empathy toward shared action and changing the world together. So when I think about listening as an act of hospitality, I'll say it this way. Listening is an endeavor of hospitality, of empathy, of slowness, and of presence on the way to forming collective action. It's not an end in itself to listen. Listening is moving towards something else. My hope is that as we learn to listen to one another as citizens of Holland, we will learn that we can actually move towards collective action to make Holland a better place, regardless of our religious background, our political leanings, our history in Holland, or our newness to Holland, but that together through listening, it can be one step, an endeavor on the way towards action. So I'll just put that little definition in the chat box. But this is an attempt. As an endeavor, it's an attempt. And I want to say that as we seek to listen as an act of hospitality, we start to do things that are counter to our natural and normative practices. The first thing we do when it comes to listening is hospitality. And just a little heads up, I'm going to share with you just some diagnostic stuff, and then I'm going to tell you a story. And then the last thing we're going to do tonight is we're going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes together in an actual practice of hospitality that requires listening. But when we talk about listening as an endeavor, we do things that are not natural and normative to our daily life. The first thing we do is we suspend judgment. Instead of listening to whether or not we agree or disagree, we listen with what I like to call open-handedness. And if wherever you are, unless you're driving, just put your hands out and put them open. So the first thing we do as an act of hospitality is we suspend judgment. I don't know about you, but there are people in this world, probably none of us, but there are people in this world who listen to agree and to disagree. That's how we start. Suspending judgment is to say no, no, no to the idea that we begin by listening to see if we agree or not. So we suspend judgment. The second thing we do is we pursue wonder. I was a math major in college, and I got really good at getting the right answer to all of the problems. And the bonus was almost all of those math problems had one answer. And so for someone who likes certainty, math was great. But when we listen as an act of hospitality, we pursue wonder instead of looking for certainty, which means we're open-hearted. So just if you want to, if this is fun or playful, just put your hands on your heart. So we're open-handed and we're open-hearted. And the third thing we do that is counter to our ways of listening is we practice surprise. Wouldn't it be wonderful if every time we sat and talked with someone or in a group, we walked away going, wow, I've never thought of that before. So practicing surprise is counter our nature of ensuring security, which is different than certainty. Security is this sense that we must be safe and learning new things is disruptive. But as hospitality, we look to be surprised. And we're not afraid of being surprised. So we're open-minded. We're open-handed, we're open-hearted, we're open-minded when it comes to listening as hospitality. Doing these three things is what I like to call free speech. Listening with free speech is suspending judgment, pursuing wonder, and practicing surprise. So let me tell you a quick story. I have a good friend whose name is Patrick. Patrick was a professor, he was a Lutheran pastor for a long time, and he's also a church consultant. Some of you may have heard this story before. But in the late 1980s and early 1990s, churches across the US, especially mainline Protestant churches, Lutherans, Methodists, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, many of them had partner congregations on Native American reservations across the country. Well, at this time, a lot of these mainline denominations were going through a bunch of mergers, and they were trying to figure out what to do with their congregations on the reservations. And one of the problems was that on the reservations, all the pastors were predominantly white people, not Native American people. So Patrick was invited to a consultation in a conference to help churches think about how to move from white leadership to Native American leadership, pastoral leadership in these churches. And Patrick packed up all of his stuff like a good consultant would do, his butcher block and his Post-it notes and his markers, and he drove from Minnesota to western South Dakota, or western Minnesota and eastern South Dakota. And he led a process of trying to get these churches to figure out what they should do differently. So the meeting started on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock. And after about an hour and a half, and if any of you are church-going folks, you know that we take a break, which means we drink coffee together. And during this coffee break, Patrick went up to one of his friends who's a Native American and said to him, "Friend, How is this going? It had been about 90 minutes by now. And his friend said to him in a moment of real honesty, he took a slow, wise breath. And if you've ever done any work with Native American communities, or if you're Native American yourself, there's a pattern of speech that's different in my experience than my own, which is he took a breath and waited for Patrick to be done speaking. I often don't wait for you to finish speaking. I take a breath, hopefully, to get you to stop speaking so that I can then tell you what I think. I'm sure none of you can relate. But this friend took a slow, wise breath and said, Patrick, you have yet to learn to listen. Isn't that a great phrase? You have yet to learn to listen. And this slowed Patrick down and created some open-hearted space. And Patrick said back to his friend, would you teach me how to listen? And the man said, yeah. And so Patrick said, when we come back from our break, why don't you take responsibility for the next session? Why don't you figure out how to help us move forward? And I'll sit in the chair and listen. So they went back to the room, and they expected that Patrick would take a seat and his friend would go up to the podium and kind of hold court of the room. And instead, his friend returned to his chair. And the room was set up that it was a Native American person next to a predominantly white pastoral leader, and on around the room in pairs. And his friend sat down in his chair and said to the group, take out your Bibles and open to Luke chapter 10. And he read the text that was in front of them, a text that has lots of life. And the next person next to him read it again. And they read it 2 or 3 times, slowly and wisely. And then this friend said to the whole group, what is this text saying to us? Not to me, not to you, but to us, a community of leaders, Native American and white leaders of churches. What is this text saying to us? And they went slowly and wisely around the circle, letting people respond to the question. And over the course of a day, everyone shared. And at the end of the day, they said, if this is what the text is saying to us, then what shall we do? And they came back the second day. And because they had listened so deeply, not simply to one another, but to the text in front of them, they spent an hour and a half rehearsing what they said the day before in action statements, moving them to a transition plan. And over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, all of these congregations transitioned to Native American leadership in these congregations on Native American reservations. Well, Patrick packed up all of his goods and drove back to Minnesota. And he said to his students and to his consulting group, we're no longer doing this work the same way. Now, when we enter a community, we're going to read the chapter of Luke 10 from the Bible, and we're going to ask, what is this text saying to us? And they've done that for 20 years now. And as a teacher and pastor, I've given this gift of listening to many congregations, to all of my students, and to multiple pastoral colleagues. It slows us down. It wasn't, what does this text mean? It wasn't, what should we do with this text? It's, what is this text? What is the life of this text saying to our lives collectively? It slows us down with patience. It calls us into the presence of God and to one another. It suspends our judgment. We're no longer listening to agree or disagree. In some ways, I like to call it an exercise in gift giving. The life of the text gives a gift to you. You, as a speaker of the text, gives a gift to a partner. And then you listening to your partner talk about the text gives a gift back to you. So I want to practice this together. We're going to do something kind of bold. We're going to put you in breakout rooms here in a few minutes. And we're going to ask you to be in pairs. So let me explain how this works in our context. We're going to try to practice listening as an act of hospitality. It is going to ask you to do things that are uncomfortable and different. So we're going to read a text twice. It's actually going to be a poem. In my classes, we always use scripture, often Luke chapter 10 or Philippians chapter 2, but this evening we're going to use a poem. And we're going to read the text twice. I'll read it the first time, and Becca will read it the second time. And we're going to give you the gift of this text. Then I'm going to put you in breakout rooms where you will be with a relatively friendly stranger. The fact is, you're all a little bit strange, but you're also good friends to somebody. So we will share our strange friendliness with one another. And when you get into your groups, you will respond to one of two questions. Let me put them here so you can see them. Give me one quick second. You're going to respond to one of two questions. What is the life of this text saying to us? Every text is saying something, and it's trying to give life to the world. Secondly, you're not asking, what does this text mean to me, or what is this text saying to me? It's, what is the life of this text saying to us? And the us in this case is the citizens of Holland that are gathered together on this call. When you enter the breakout rooms, I'm going to use two people's names. So when you enter a breakout room, let's say that Ginger and Carol are partners. I'm not sure if that will be true, but let's just say that it is. Ginger, you get to go first, and you get to practice what we call free speech. So you will speak for 3 uninterrupted minutes. And what that means is that Carol is not going to go, yeah, right, right on completely. Let me respond. She's just going to quietly and as non-verbally and non-physically as she can, she's going to let her ears receive the gift that you give to her. I'll let you know when your 3 minutes are up. And then Carol, it will be your chance to talk for 3 uninterrupted minutes, again, with no verbal or physical feedback. That's a very different practice than most of us try. And when I'm teaching on Zoom, I love the nonverbal feedback. It's very helpful. But in this case, we're not going to do it. And then at the end of that, you've received a gift and you've given a gift. When we come back together from the breakout rooms into the main, I'm going to ask the question, what did you hear? And this is the challenging part. You are not going to share what you said, but you are clearly and concisely to share what you heard. And you are going to give the gift that your partner gave you to the whole Zoom call group. The hope is that when you give clearly and concisely what your partner gave you, they will feel affirmed and say, amen. And it's an act of hospitality. Also, it's the hope that the whole group receives the gift from you and we respond, thank you for this gift. And in this way, listening is a gift-giving exercise. So we're going to read the text twice. You're going to go into breakout rooms, answering one of two questions. What is the life of this text saying to us? Or if that is too abstract, the second question is, if you could ask any question of this text, what would you ask? You don't have to deal with both questions, just one. You'll each have 3 minutes. If you finish speaking at 1.5 minutes, just enjoy the 90 seconds of silence together. When we come back, again, you will not share what you said, you will share what you've heard. Are there any questions? If so, feel free to type them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. All right. So I'm going to put the poem in the chat box. Linda asked a great question. You will let us know when 3 minutes has elapsed. Yes, I will. I will send you a note in the chat box or in your message groups that says the minutes will end. Also, there should be a timer in the upper right corner that says 6 minutes. So you can manage your 3 minutes apiece, but I will also give you a little word. How do you determine who goes first? I'd love to say that's up to you, but if it's helpful, whoever's name comes first in the alphabet, first name in the alphabet, you get to go first, just to make it clear. All right. We're going to read the poem together. Let me do this. Becca, would you mind reading first?
There we go. Yes, now I can do it. I'm unmuted. All right, here we go. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the ocean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place and the family of things. I'm going to send you out into rooms. If you end up alone in a room, please come back to the main room and you'll be my partner. But at this point, I will send you off unless there are any other questions. Seeing none, you'll be back in 6 minutes. Go ahead and click join. So this might be a challenge for us, but I trust that we're all smart enough to navigate Zoom. So I'm going to ask the question, what did you hear? And again, this is not to share what you said, but what you heard. So I'll go first as an example. I heard Carol say that we are not the only ones here and that we're not the center of all things. And that releases us from the pressure of obligation and welcomes us to the invitations and opportunities. Others, what did you hear?
I can go. I heard that we can look inside to our despair. Well, my person said this, but it's for all of us, right? That we can look inside to the beauty and despair and struggles and the ease and the comfort. And how are we connected to all creation, and specifically other people in creation? And what can I learn or we learn of how we can become, and how can we lessen the requirements in ourselves and take in what life offers generously?
I heard, we're all in this together.
I heard this sense that there's really, in this text, there's kind of this three parts of despair, the coming together, and then finding a way forward. And Rick really shared kind of this, even in this sense of COVID times, a common thread for him of sort of thinking about his ancestors and dealing with the flu of 1918 and finding kind of that thread of common humanity through time, that we've all struggled and had despair over time, and yet there's a way forward.
Thanks, Becca.
I received a gift from Kiefer and heard that she liked the poem, felt it was religious in tone and nature, that even if you feel like a sinner, you are who you are, and the world continues on. We are to embrace it, and it will embrace us back. See the world and everything that's there. We're not alone on this earth. We need to open our eyes and see it.
Excellent.
I heard that there's good news in the early part about not having to, crawl on your knees repenting. There's hope for us that we, like, in terms of the city of Holland, even, like, to be who we are and to, well, I'm not sure I heard the rest of it, that part very well. The other thing was the idea of listening to your despair and then telling you mine, and the question, do I really want to do that? Am I really ready for that? But knowing that when we do listen, it leads to hope. But still the question, do I really want to do that?
I heard that Yolanda, who I spoke with and listened to, I hope, was mostly struck by the theme of nature. And as she was listening to the poem, she shared that the other day she was recently outside and she looked up and saw geese, and it brought up the image of flying home and feeling free and being surrounded by the beauty of nature and being part of that. And I was impressed by that.
I heard that I heard Rebecca, and I thought Rebecca did a fantastic job of talking about, she opened up, I felt big with the word commonality. Then she said, hey, we're in comfort, but not alone. So I felt she was going smaller, which is good. And then it's finally a teaching of relationships. So I really enjoyed talking with her. I thought she had an excellent presentation.
I heard first of who is this speaking? Who is this assuming authority? Who is this that is speaking to you? And this authoritative figure. And then moving forward through, it almost was almost opposite of everyone else is saying, is that it's almost discouraging because it doesn't matter what your actions are. Your actions aren't going to make a difference in the world, and you don't have an impact.
I heard from Esther that she actually has seen Indigenous people walk on their knees into a place of worship in the Church of Guadalupe in Mexico City. And as a young child, she didn't understand it, but this text really spoke to her because it showed that you can have a reverence and be beckoned into reflection and silence and into God's presence without having to be on your knees, and you can still be in a state of reverence.
Thanks, Donna. Anyone else want to share?
I heard that you can connect with the creatures of the earth in wonder, and by observation, try to connect life to ourselves and wonder exactly what is the season of the geese and where are we at with these creatures. And the second part of that is we are just pebbles on the earth, but yet we all amount together to something beautiful, but we can just be our little pebble and be okay with that.
I heard from Donna, and it was so beautiful, the way she described the passage. And I'm embarrassed to say that I've forgotten, but I remember a couple of things. Donna talked about how we're all connected in some way, and how nature is part of that, and the wonderment of the passage, and everything inside the passage about the passage made you like kind of sit back and, you know, think in terms of wonder. Donna, I'm so sorry. I'm not representing exactly what you said, but it was so beautiful the way she spoke about the interconnectedness in nature, that I kind of got lost in what she was saying. So that means that I wasn't listening. I was listening, Donna, but I should have taken notes. I'm so bad.
Master. Peace to you. Thank you. Anyone else want to share what you heard? Well, let me make a move. I've been doing this now for about 15 years, a little bit more. And with my students, we read the same exact text every week. We read Philippians 2 every week for 14 weeks in a row, doing this practice in class. With elders and deacons in our former congregations, we would do this practice every month with the same text, often Philippians chapter 2. And it's amazing how in my world of Christian leadership, those scriptures just keep on speaking. And I think in some ways, this poem by Mary Oliver called Wild Geese keeps on speaking. And so you could do this practice next week and have a very different conversation with the very same text. And isn't that the way our lives are? Your life is a text. It's unfolding, and it's a gift to the world. And if people take the time to read it, they will find what this life of the text is speaking to the world. The same is true with all the people in your sphere of influence. They are living and walking texts, giving off a life for this world if we'll take the moment to slow down, to be present, and to suspend judgment in order to listen to the text that's standing in front of us. But if we can, I'd like to do one last thing, which is what we do with our students when we practice dwelling in the Word. And that is, and you can now speak for yourself. You don't have to speak for somebody else, but if you'd like to speak for Catherine, you're welcome to do so. That could be fun. Just teasing, that was a bad Zoom joke. Anyway, you can speak for yourself, but the question is, what is it like to listen this way? This is the 68th, I believe, anniversary of John Dewey's death. He was an educationalist, and he used to say, we do not learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. And so as we want to learn listening as an act of hospitality, you have taken some time today to do it. Now let's reflect on it. What was it like to listen this way? And Esther, you kind of got us kicked off. You said it was hard. I got lost in the beauty of my friend's speech. That's what it was like to listen this way. But for others of you, if you're willing, what is it like to listen this way? And I might interject as we go.
I did take notes. because I was concerned about getting lost, and so I had that tension between wanting to perform well and be able to reflect that back, but really also try to deeply let the beauty sinking in.
Thank you.
And I veered toward the side of taking some notes because Ginger had lots of wonderful things to say.
Yeah. There are multiple ways to receive the gift. Taking notes is one. Thank you.
I think it's really hard to listen without responding. And I don't mean even responding verbally, but I'm so used to communicating by acknowledging that I'm listening and nodding or, giving a hand gesture or a smile. And I don't know if that's all bad.
So there's an important piece to this practice of dwelling in the Word. I often call it, this is a gift of grace of listening. And the interesting thing about gifts and grace is that you can't beat yourself up if you don't do it perfectly or the right way. It's a gift, and how you receive it and how you practice it is indeed that. So be good to yourself and recognize that we're trying to learn this. When it comes to the active listening, which is a nice gift in terms of helping someone keep talking and showing that you're engaged, sometimes we can find ourselves nodding in an affirmation while someone's saying something that we completely are saying no, like this. And so to resist the physicality of listening is to suspend, again, the verbal and nonverbal cues of the agree to disagree framework many of us listen in. Again, this is not right or wrong or good or bad. It's a practice to try on for a while. Thanks so much, Ginger. That was really great. Anyone else? What was it like to listen this way?
I'm not signed up for the class. I'm just in with Bill. But to me, it's sort of freeing because you're not planning in your head how you're going to respond when it's your turn. You're actually free to listen and to take in from what they say, at least for me.
That's great.
The exercise was very challenging for me. I was the second to speak, so I was aware, even though I had to put away my own thoughts, they were there. And I'm a passionate person with strong convictions. And so it was challenging for me to just push that aside, what I thought or what I might say, and just really concentrate on my person.
Paul and I could not, we couldn't get to our assigned person. So we talked to one another. And I have had a problem for years and years about wanting to respond to the speaker. I can hardly wait to say what's going through my head. And I blame part of it on my age because I think, oh, by the time this person gets done talking, I'm going to completely forget what it was I wanted to respond to. But I love this. I love the poem. Paul and I just talked to each other because we couldn't get our audio to talk to our assigned people, and I'm very sorry for that. But it was an exercise that I need to practice, to just listen, which was lovely. Thank you.
Jane, thank you so much. I'll just share a quick little anecdote. I walked across the north of Spain about a year ago on something called the Camino de Santiago.
Oh, I want to do that.
And the first 5 days, I was full on my male American self on an adventure to conquer the 500 miles. And I was walking fast, much like we listen and speak speedily so we don't forget or we don't lose our thought or whatever else. And about 5 days in, I developed a blister on the back of my foot, about a third the size of my head. And it utterly shut down my body where I couldn't walk. And we often say on the Camino, if you don't want to slow down to the pace of the Camino will slow you down to its own pace. And this practice of giving people 3 minutes of uninterrupted free speech is a little bit like the Camino, saying, you'll get your time. But if you don't want to practice the time of the way will make you practice its own time. And so I really appreciate that, because I think that that speedy thinking and speedy speaking is something that's so basic and normative in our natural and normal ways of communication. So Jane, thank you for letting us into your story a little bit. Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead.
I have something else, responding actually to the author of the poem. I was telling this to Ginger, that I think because it's fall, I was presuming it was a fall poem, but I did go and just look it up because I was so curious that geese only spend like 4 months in the north, and we think of them as Canadian geese. In the north, the summer is their home, but when they migrate to the southern U.S., they're actually down there for more like 7 or 8 months. So all this, I was perceiving this as a fall time poem, and maybe it is because they're actually heading home to the south. The geese probably don't think of the north any more of their home than the south do, where we tend to think, well, they're going south for the winter, but they really belong to us. Maybe it's not the other way around, but all the ways.
Thank you. I think that's an important way of listening, is that, and actually Esther, you did this too in your response to Donna, is this sense of when we listen to one another, there's so much knowledge and experience in our own lives that comes to life in these texts, that by giving one another space, this is the practicing surprise. I never knew that. And our own knowledge base and our own growth mindset can help us discover things from speakers if we're slow enough to give them time to share the story. So whether it's the story from the church in Guadalupe and that you mentioned, being on your knees, or this knowledge, Catherine, that you brought to us. But there's so much in our lives that we can bring to one another if we slow down and engage with wonder. Anyone else? What was it like to listen this way?
I do have a question. In talking about responding and not responding, as the listener, I think a lot of us are programmed as the one speaking to look for that affirmation that someone's listening. So that takes practice too, to, I guess, maintain eye contact and body language that would tell someone you're listening without the nodding and everything else. So I think it goes both ways of practicing that.
That's really helpful, Ginger. I think you're exactly right. That's so much of our communication practices, which are not bad. They're necessary in so much of our life for feedback. But there is this question about what would it be like if when we spoke, we weren't getting instantaneous gratification through people's verbals and nonverbals? Would we still have the trust to offer ourselves to others, and would others receive ourselves from them? It's a great question, Ginger, and a great observation.
I think I was given a good reminder because I know that Mary Oliver poem. I like it a lot, and I've read it quite a few times. But when Yolanda was speaking to me, and she brought up a perspective of the poem that had never occurred to me before, and I'm thinking, wow, it's like I'm learning something by actually being a listener here, and it just kind of blew me away. But it was also very satisfying to feel like, well, the effort of listening gave me a reward too, by being able to gain some insight.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Donna, did you have something?
This takes a different spin in what we're talking about, but being assured that someone is listening provides a space to experiment with language and experiment with imagination that is more free than if you're not assured that that's a safe space. So that was interesting to experience that.
And you did experience that as a safe, open, hospitable space?
Yes, definitely.
Anything particular that your partner did that made it that way for you?
Well, I know she follows instructions, and that's what you told us to do.
Thank you.
I'm a rule follower, but I want to tell you that I got lost in what Donna was saying. It was so beautiful and poetic that it was so, I don't know. I have to slow down. I'm always trying to do something, and my mind goes like this. And that, when you were talking about the poem, I got lost in what you were saying, and it was so beautiful.
And that makes me think about the space of what you said, Kyle, about pursuing wonder, right? Like how when you can allow yourself to stop and listen in this way, that there's like that natural space to pursue wonder in a way that maybe isn't there when we're constantly trying to think of like the next thing we're going to say, right? Or the next thing, and that getting lost in another person's response is a beautiful thing, right? Like that's not the fact that you couldn't reiterate it, Esther, doesn't mean that you didn't absorb it and embody it, right, in that moment with that. And it makes me just think about like what would this look like if we could put a text between us more often to have conversations around, rather than you know, I don't know, the things that sort of divide us in a sense, right? Like if we can have a text like this that comes together and we can pursue wonder together, how might that change the way that we learn from one another? Because I know I learned a lot from Rick just in our few minutes of just hearing from him, like how he read and absorbed that poem. And I think that's the gift of it, right? Is we all have different lenses that we're going to see it through.
Yeah, that's helpful, Becca. Thank you.
Hearing all of you talk makes me think more about how we all are so, as Esther said, geared to produce and perform. And listening to another person is a gift to them. But to receive is the harder part. So maybe we're all learning better to be receivers rather than performers.
Wow.
That's so helpful. I want to say thank you to everyone who's taken the risk to share something in this group where we don't all know each other well. Thank you also for receiving a practice that may have been new to some of you, and for doing it so well and wisely. I do hope that I'm going to post those 3 pieces about suspending judgment, pursuing wonder, and practicing surprise. I think that part of the reason why this art of listening is so important is considering our times, whether that be a national election, local elections, COVID, our family lives, whatever it might be. But I do wonder, in the midst of trying to be us, the city of Holland, are there folks with whom it's hard to sit across a table and listen? And what might it be to, like, this actually goes to exactly what Becca said. What might it be that instead of sitting down to an empty table for discussion, we put a text between us? In my world of teaching at the seminary and being a pastor, that text is probably always going to be scripture. But for some of you, it might be a poem. For some of you, it might be a song from a tradition that's familiar to you, or maybe tradition that's familiar to somebody else. But to not go to an empty table, but to place a text there and to slow down and to wonder together, and to maybe find that someone that's hard to be with becomes more human, more beautiful, and more alive. Again, this isn't the end. If we do this well, it doesn't mean everything is going to be perfect and fixed. It's an endeavor on the way to a shared life. whether we call that the city of Holland or the country of the US. That's my hope, is that this kind of practice gets us there. And so thank you for engaging today. I look forward to meeting you all again. I saw a few of you say, let's do the Camino at any point in time that you would like to do that. I would be grateful. I was supposed to be coming back from the Camino on Sunday, but I obviously canceled it because of my family life. But I'll be heading back in May. I'd love to talk about that with any of you. But until then, it's great to meet you. Go in peace, and I look forward to seeing you around town. Take care.
One small announcement. I just want to ask everyone if it's possible for you to like this event on Facebook and just make a comment about, you know, what you learned, or just make a little comment, because I want people to recognize that these events, the art of listening, navigating difficult conversations, is not a political conversation. Rather, it is a life-giving conversation. And I feel like I was touched by listening and learning. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
Esther, can you announce Monday also, please?
Yes. The Art of Listening, our final speaker will be Dr. Lena Chavez. She'll be talking about your heart in front of your head. So I hope that you will join us. It begins at 7 p.m. on Monday, October 26th, and you can sign up on the same Eventbrite that you signed up for this one.
May I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Will you repeat the first one ever?
The first one, yes, it's recorded, and we had to do some editing with it because I didn't realize that I was recording myself, and there's a lot of like mindless chatter talking to myself. So we're working on that, but it'll be posted. And when it is posted, if you'd like, I can send it to you, to this group.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
All right. See everybody on Monday. Looking forward to it. Thank you all for being here. And thank you,
everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Kyle.
See you all.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Hayden, Paul.
Bye, Yolanda.
Thank you, Kyle.
Bye, Yolanda.